The Leafs keep their winning streak alive thanks to the brick wall and still looking to boost their center ice position ahead of the trade deadline. We'll discuss that and more here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leafs centric podcast, hosted by myself, David Morassutti, and joining me once again is my good friend Frank Stanisci, who is filling in with Mike DeStefano out. He's probably sailing somewhere in roughly where I was sailing this week. So once again, thank you, Frank. Yeah. 1 year, Frank, Mike and I are going to be doing a cruise on a ship. I think it's coming down to
do the show on a ship. Do a cruise and do the show on the ship. I get it. Thanks for having me on.
One day it's going to happen. I'm feeling a little better.
Good.
A little better. It helps that the Leafs win. And I stayed up, watched the whole game. At first, I was going to see if you want to do a podcast after the game, but you know what? I just needed a good, because after yesterday, that was a bit of a struggle to do yesterday's show, and I thank everybody for the positive comments. I am pushing through. I'm going to push through. Feeling better today, though. Water helps, hydration, keeping myself moving, all that good stuff. And it helps, again, at least taking care of the Flyers 3-2. And let's just say that this game was another example of why goaltending has been the hero of the Leaf season so far. I don't think, when you look at everything that's come together this year for this team, has been the number one. I wouldn't even say it's a bit of an under to Joseph Woll a little bit, but it's been the much needed surprise, I guess, in some ways.
Absolutely. The big reason why the Leafs now are 6 points in front of Florida in the division, and they're just a winning streak away from first overall in the conference, is because of the goaltending. And again, it's easy to say that, David, but the shot blocking and the way the defense plays helps the goaltending immensely.
It does. I mean, the goaltenders feel like they're in a better position to see the puck, make saves. Usually when you see some of the shots going, it's because they're literally trying to block the shot, but they get in the way of the goaltender. The goaltender can't see it. So, like, you look at the game last night, and the Flyers had to work for the 2 goals that they scored. Like, they weren't easy goals that they scored. And what I liked about, the Leafs the Flyers did outplay the Leafs last night. You can look at all the advanced metrics. They had a better expected goals in that game, especially in the first period. The first period was, I think, where Joseph Woll really stood out. Right? So Leafs only had, only 2 shots.
2 shots
on goal in that period. They had 2 shots on goal, and they had 2 power plays in that first period. And they got none of those shots on the power play. So there was a lot of that going around where the Leafs just weren't able to get pucks through. The Flyers are blocked. Like, give the Flyers credit. Part of the reason why they did have the shot, they did lead in shots. They were blocking a lot of shots too. And we know that that's something that the Flyers probably were really trying to do. Probably had a better scouting of the Leafs after that game on Sunday and knew that they needed to find a way to get in front of those pucks. So that there was a lot of that going on. But it just felt like the Leafs just weren't doing enough to get the pucks on net, especially in that first period.
Yeah, well, we had Timmins made probably the biggest mistake of the game, and it ended up in the back of the net.
Yep.
That's the kind of thing we're talking about with the Leafs defense helping the goaltender, not doing that often. Previous teams did that a lot, right? And the one thing the Leafs don't do as much as they under Berube that they didn't do under their previous coach is that they don't fall asleep. And what we've seen is when they've needed to be intense, they've risen to the occasion. A lot of times, last year they'd make mistakes out of nowhere and give teams a life, and that's when they were out shooting other teams 10-2, and they'd leave the first period behind 1-0. So we're seeing what dedication to defense can do for you, and we're also seeing that it doesn't really hurt your offense, which is an important factor in why the Leafs keep winning.
Well, it is, right? Like the Leafs aren't blowing away teams offensively that much this year. We know the goal scoring isn't to the same degrees we've seen in past years. Now, part of the reason is Austin Matthews has been out of the lineup. He finally scores since returning a couple games ago. Big goal he scored. Initially, it looked like it was going to be a power play goal, but it was just as the power play was expiring. And that's really, I think, another difference on the Craig Berube is if there's going to be, if you're going to have those lulls, if you're going to have those mistakes, you better be ready to own up to those mistakes and correct them. And I do think that's another just difference. Yeah, the Leafs aren't getting as many pucks in the net, but when they do get chances on net, they're making them count. And so those I think are a couple, differences really with what I'm seeing from the Leafs, especially in these last few games, is they're keeping it close. Yeah, they're getting outshot at times, but when they really need to pick it up, they're picking it up. And that happened especially in the third period. Third period, they were the much better team. Showed on the goal sheet. Matthew Nyes getting the game-winning goal, tipped right in front of the net. This kid just continues to impress.
And Morgan Riley's doing what he's supposed to do, and that is getting a puck through. And he did that. It's really nice. The other show I was talking about Morgan Riley and what he needs to do. And it's like he was listening and said, I'm going to prove that guy's an idiot. And, he did a good job of that. He made me look like a real idiot, but I'm really glad that he did. And, I said then my criticism wasn't personal. My criticism was based on execution and statistics. Right. But as a player, he's a positive. Right. I even would have said before and would even think about it now that, he gets into these streaks, and it would be nice if they were tied together. There was a shorter gap in between them, because they need him to be a number 2 defenseman on the second pairing. He can't be playing like a 4 or a 5. He can't do that, because the Leafs need his scoring. And good news is part of his success in getting on the score sheet is accompanied by other defensemen on the Leafs, which also, we talk about the bottom 6 providing goals, right? You can't be just a top line. Well, we haven't talked that much, and people started talking about it when the defense was getting blanked. And now that they're starting to contribute, we're seeing the side effect on the score sheet.
Yeah, we are. And again, the blue line, when we're talking about struggles on the power play and struggles with scoring, part of that comes from the blue line, right? Teams that are near the top of the league, they got defensemen who are able to put up big points. You see it with Cale Makar in Colorado. You see even in Pittsburgh with Erik Karlsson, he's starting to pick things up a little bit too after a bit of a tough go there for himself. I'm just gonna quickly pull up the Quinn Hughes in Vancouver, right? Zach Werenski's having. I don't even people realize how good of a season Zach Werenski. Columbus is having such a good year in considering, and Zach Werenski's got 46 points in 41 games. I don't think people even realize that. Josh Morrissey, Shea Theodore, for Morgan Riley, he doesn't necessarily need to be Cale Makar. No one, I would never expect anyone to be in that stratosphere, but he does need to get to a point where he is more of a contributor offensively. And look, he doesn't have to score the goals, but do exactly what you did last night. Put the puck in an area where it can get redirected or one of your teammates can find it. I think also where his other benefit and his other strength is, and we saw it on that overtime goal, getting in on the rush. When Morgan Riley has a clear sight of the net, he's got a good shot that can beat goaltenders in tight. So I think maybe a little more of him getting in on the rush too would be nice. as well. And I think it's gonna come back. It's gonna take a little time. He's at 20 points through 42 games, which obviously has him on pace to just below 40 points on the year. You definitely want to see him get a little bit more. And obviously see him being on the plus side of the plus minus column. He's a minus 10 right now, which
Exactly.
it's not what we want to see. Morgan Rielly. The last time Morgan Rielly was a negative, a minus player was a couple of years ago when he was a minus 9. But for the most part of his career, Morgan Rielly was a positive player under Sheldon Keefe, let's say. We have to kind of excuse the pre-Sheldon Keefe era where the team wasn't exactly very good. But yeah, Riley's just got to continue. Look, wasn't a great start to the year, but you see as we've said, season has a long way to go to before it ends. All right,
yeah.
Let's talk a little bit more on this game on the other side. I do want to get to our 3 stars of the game because it is another Leafs win, which means we have to give our kudos to the 3 stars of the game. And we get to talk about our other favorite topic on the Locked On Leafs podcast. That's trade talk. We'll discuss maybe where the Leafs could be shifting their focus in terms of who they want to go after ahead of the trade deadline. We'll discuss that next year on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. If you took my advice yesterday and put a little bit of money on Austin Matthews to score, you probably made some money, especially even on Matthew Knies, another player that I thought would be worth throwing a couple of bucks on. Just visit FanDuel.com and join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make the season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsman partner of the NFL and the Locked On Podcast Network. Welcome back to the Locked On Leafs podcast. David Morassutti here. Joined with me is my good friend Frank Stanisci. As you know, Mike is away this week, taking over after I had my week off. As you can see, I probably sounds like I need another vacation after the last one. But as you know, with every Leafs win, we do the 3 stars of the game. And since I've been back, I've only had the pleasure of doing 3 stars of the game. So this is a nice little streak we have going here. Initially, I thought maybe it was going to be a good, bad, and the ugly considering how that game was going, but we now have the opposite happening. So I'll give my first star of the game because I want to see if Frank matches me. It's got to be the goaltender, Joseph Woll. No player was more deserving of the victory last night than Joseph Woll. 5 straight wins right now for Joseph Woll. What a streak he's on right now.
And the important thing that he did is in that first period, the Leafs were only down 1-0. I hate going back to the Keefe era, but that would not be a period where they would come out 1-0. That would be they'd be behind 4-0 in a game like that with the goaltending they've had previously and the defense that they had previously.
Yeah,
so, I agree. He was the best player.
So I want to bring up a note that I saw in Elliot Friedman's 32 Thoughts because we know the history that this Leafs team has had with goaltending. It's, you can go back to, back to Potvin, Curtis Joseph, Ed Belfour. I believe Ed Belfour was named on the quarter century mark team. There was he was honored by the NHL for his time with the Leafs. But Elliot Friedman made this note in the 32 Thoughts column that just came out. Prior to Christmas, Toronto ranked first in goals against average and save percentage. The Leafs have not led the NHL in goals against average in almost 65 years. 65 years. We're talking Johnny Bower.
Yep. Terry Sawchuk.
Jerry McNamara. Cesare Maniago?
Cesar Maniago. Yeah, Cesar Maniago.
Thank you, Frank. They put up a combined 2.49 goals against average in 1960-61.
And that's when games were being played on a regular basis of 2-1, 1-0, 1-1, because ties counted then. So
they've had in recent memory in terms of, I mean, Christ, I wasn't still alive at that point, but top three placing in 1992-93 when they were second with Fear, Potvin, Walmsley, third in save percentage in 94-95, the year I was born, with Potvin and Rhodes. Like, you just, it's something the Leafs have not had really. They've had good goaltending. I'm not saying the Leafs have had bad goaltending, but they haven't had goaltending that's far and away above what we've seen across the league, right? Like, they don't have, again, and they're doing this without technically an Andrei Vasilevsky, Sorokin, Shesterkin, Hellebuyck. Like, they don't have that elite goaltender. They're doing it with a committee of goaltenders that have put up great numbers.
Well, they haven't established their reputation yet because of the sample size. But let me drill down on the plus minus and what it says about the Leafs and their goaltending and why the goaltending is so important. I'm looking here, and the Leafs are 27-13. So they've won 14 more games than they've lost. And do you know how many goals more they have than that they've scored than they've allowed? 17. That's just barely over one goal a win that they've done, right? So that's something. Take, for example, you've got Tampa Bay. They're plus 33. Plus 33. Yeah, and then you've got the Bruins, and this is what the Leafs would look like. The Bruins are in a fairly good spot. They're minus 24 in goals. So those to me are basically those facts or those statistics are proof that the Leafs are playing very tight games and ending up on the right side of a tight game. And that's the one place where there's no denying that's goaltending and defense.
Yeah. Maple Leafs are 16-7-2 when being outshot this season. This is from Sportsnet stats.
Yep.
Their 16 wins lead the NHL. I remember back when advanced stats were being brought out, advanced metrics, and the Leafs were one of the worst at being outchanced.
They couldn't beat a Zamboni goalie.
Right? Especially this was during like the Randy Carlyle era. Oh, yeah, let's bring up the Zamboni driver again. This is back like the Randy Carlyle era. They didn't have the goaltending that they did at that point to sustain that. Like, it's one thing to allow the shots. It's having the goaltenders that are capable of making those saves. So I think, like, look, Joseph Woll, I've constantly said I've had a lot of faith in Joseph Woll. I thought that the Leafs were smart to get that contract done. He just needed to prove one thing. He's needed to only prove one thing. Can he stay healthy? Now, look, the year didn't start right for him. I totally get that. But since then, it's been good, right? There's been maybe a few little moments.
Wasn't it a couple of games ago when he looked like he hurt himself? And and come on, who in Leaf Nation didn't go, oh no?
Yeah.
Who didn't do that? And then what did he do? He went back in the net and he stood strong and he played, well, I don't know if injured is the right, but he played dented, right? Which is a great sign, right? That helps everybody believe that this guy can play through pain. And that's something every player has to do. It's not it's not unusual just to goaltenders. Every player has to do that. And that's what the great players do.
Yeah. And one thing I'll also say, the Flyers, and I think they were doing this on purpose.
Running into him.
Well, not even running into him. Few of those shots that were coming in from the side were hitting him in the mask.
Yep.
When you're in opposition that's having a hard time scoring on a goalie, you do one of two things. You try to get into his kitchen, or you try to, a little shot to the mask, maybe throws him off a little bit. And it happened a few times.
That's a Gordie Howe tactic. That was what Gordie Howe used to do all the time. He used to go down the ice and you go, okay, it's time to get this goalie guessing. and when you know that shot's coming up high, it has you thinking. And but he's handled that really, really well. Yeah. And like when he had to finally take the mask off because the strap came off, And the referee came over, and I think the referee said to him, and he told the referee, he said, "Look, I'm sorry I tossed the mask off," but and you could see the referee nod and go, "Yeah, I get it. I didn't notice that the strap came off."
Yeah, it's he's done a phenomenal job. Let's go to second star. I mean, I got to give it to Austin Matthews.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's
He
looked
won it.
more and more
Face up.
comfortable, since returning. Scored the big goal last night, where 2-1. It was a brutal goal that Timmins looked very terrible on. The Flyers were really taking control of the game. Scores that goal, gets into the scoring position, and he's again. I don't know what the injury is, but it's
I
not
think
looking
it
like it's
affected his
an
shooting.
issue.
Whatever that injury is, affected his shooting, and I wonder if it's that wrist problem that he's had over the years, because his shooting is far crisper now that he's back.
Yeah. So I think he's continued to look really. I even would have put Matthew Nyes in that conversation too. I think they both have looked so good together since he's come back. It's clear that Matthew Nyes is at his best when Austin Matthews is in the lineup.
Absolutely, and I would also give Dewar an honorable mention.
Yeah,
Which to me was ironic. The coach. There's two things about what the coach said, and in this game when he said, "I want the team to be a little tougher." Two things. Did you expect Dewar to be the guy that dropped the gloves? Number two, Ty Domi wasn't here on the mentor trip. It's kind of funny that he would mention that. I wonder if that was a coincidence that you mentioned about toughness, and the only mentor that wasn't around that I think would exemplify the coach, that would be Ty Domi.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're totally right. And look, like out of all the players I expected to throw down the gloves, was not Connor Dewar.
He wasn't on the bingo card.
Was not on the bingo card. I didn't even know the guy really fought, right? And it leads me to that other point of Ryan Reeves. I didn't bring it up in the first part, but it's like he was brought in to add some toughness. I look, and I don't need him to drop the gloves for the sake of dropping the gloves, but I didn't see that intimidating factor from him. He had a chance to score a goal, and it didn't happen. Almost like he wasn't expecting it. I think at this point, does he need to be in the lineup? Do the Leafs really need him right now?
I think the way he's being deployed is the only way he can be deployed at this time, and that is hit and miss, play and don't play, play and don't play. And the coach put him in for a reason. And the coach wasn't wrong. I mean, we saw what not only the shots up high against Woll, also them going into the crease, and taking the shot and keep going towards the goaltender. There were a couple of times there, where the Leafs were intelligent in the sense that I know that I talk about toughness and they should stand up for each other, but they didn't fall in the trap of getting carried away and taking a penalty because they were, the opportunity to tempt them was there with the behavior of the Philadelphia Flyers heading towards the net. That's
true. That's very true. And for my third star, I'm going to give it to Chris Tanev and Oliver Ekman-Larsson, the pairing that kind of expected them to be together, and they were pretty good last night. They were the top two on the Leafs in expected goals. So essentially, when they're on the ice, the Leafs had a better chance of scoring goals than getting scored on. They also when they were on the ice, the Leafs had more chances on net than on the other end, which for a shutdown pairing, it's pretty good. And I think Ekman-Larsson, there was a couple moments where he showed his physicality once again, which I like, a little bit of feistiness. And Tanev continued to be that rock on the blue line. They really needed it. And I thought Jake McCabe, you still missed that presence a little bit, but I thought it was mitigated a bit because of the way that Tanev and Oliver Ekman-Larsson played together last night.
Yeah, and it's that we talked about last show. Like I said, last show, there have to be defensemen. Defensemen have to be really good at something. They got to be really good at something because the coach is going to deploy them when that asset is necessary. So and that's the thing about OEL, right? He can play really well offensively, and he's very dedicated to defense. He's a playoff guy. He's a guy that we're going to appreciate him even more in the playoffs.
Yeah, no, it's going to be very. Yeah, I agree on that. The guy just went on a Stanley Cup run. Sure, he wasn't playing in a prominent role, but he was still playing on a playoff team and went on to win a cup, and that experience is going to be valuable. I think the fact they were able to put him in a position to play in a top pairing, he's used to it. He's done it before. And I think that's why it's worked out quite well with McCabe out. And we'll see how that continues because the games are only going to get tougher from here now. So let's put a bow on this game. Let's now get into our favorite conversation. That's trade talk. We'll discuss the big thing the Leafs are going to have to do heading into the trade deadline. Who are they potentially going to look at? Well, we got some names being thrown out there. We'll discuss those next year on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. One of my favorite memories was attending a concert last year. I've been to many concerts, Pearl Jam, so many great memories at those concerts. The energy and excitement were unforgettable. Now, Game Time has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats. You don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I've been to Leaf games. I went to a couple of Leaf games last year using Game Time. It did help me find the better deals in terms of where the sections were. So make sure you go and you take advantage of that. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Welcome back here on the Locked On Leafs podcast. David Morassutti back, and I'm feeling a lot better now. For anybody that's maybe worried about me at this point of the show, I'm hanging in a little bit better than I did yesterday. So thank you again. I had a few people reach out to me and make sure I was okay. It's almost everyone from my trip got sick except for my sister. She's the only one, and out of all of them, I thought she would have at least gotten sick. Nope. She stayed away from the sick people, apparently.
Now that teacher knows how to do it.
She's probably built up a good immune system.
Absolutely, she has.
She's got sick quite a bit to start the year, so that's probably very true. Now we do have the trade deadline's not for a little bit. Like the Leafs aren't in a position where they want to be making a deal this week, but there is a point in time where you have to start getting your list, getting your kind of your position of where you want to go, where you want to target. We know that there's really the Leafs have really only two things that they can look at right now heading to the trade deadline. It'd be nice if they could add a defenseman, add some depth, considering Tanev has missed time. Now this is a second time where McCabe has missed time. That's a tough one when your team has lost a top four defenseman. So a defenseman would be nice, but it's not the biggest need. It's been the biggest, this one area, we've talked about it many times on the show. I think Mike has had a podcast episode about it while I was gone. I listened to a bit of it when I was away, and that's center ice. The Leafs have been very fortunate, I think, in a lot of ways this year that John Tavares has taken a step forward instead of a step back. Because if he had taken a step back, this would have been a more critical situation, especially with Austin Matthews missing time. Max Domi being able to play third line center has at least alleviated the pressure, I think, on management to have to go out and make a deal now. But I think when the Leafs start playing tougher teams that are better than them in the standings, they're going to have a game against Carolina coming up. They're a really good team this year, as we have come to see.
And the Leafs have had a hard time against that team for years.
Yeah. They've had the Hurricanes have always had the Leafs number in a lot of ways. That's
why this game is so important.
Yep. It's a big measuring stick game, and it shows management exactly where this team is. Against the Capitals, you saw kind of that depth wasn't really there with Matthews out. That game against the Jets a few weeks ago, where again the Leafs depth just wasn't able to step up against the healthier, fuller lineup in Winnipeg. So there's been names thrown around. Darren Dreger threw out a few names. But I also saw Ellie Freeman again on the 32 Thoughts bring up that the Leafs, as much as they want to go out and hit the rental market for defensemen, and there are a couple that are being brought up. Brock Nelson's one name. Mikael Granlund is another name that if you're looking for a, I guess, affordable rental option, sure. But I think what Ellie Freeman's bringing up here is the Leafs are in a position where they could add a player with term. And I think it's also just a shift in the mindset of a lot of teams right now that if you're going to give up assets for a player, you want to more than a one and done. The Leafs are not in a we want to win a cup and this is our only year to do it.
And they're not desperate in that position.
No, you look at this team and the way it's constructed, the way the contracts all lined up. This is a team that's going to want to be competing for the next few years again, right? You know, yes, you're going to have to pay new contracts to Marner and Tavares. You got Nylander's contract kicking in, Matthews, but they've been able to really put this window together, staying with Jake McCabe sticking around, with Tanev signed for a few years. Riley's still here. Like, they got their core locked in. It's not like, 1 or 2 years left of this core and that's it. This is a long run sort of thing. So, two names were brought in here. He brought up Scott Laughton first. He's a good third line center, but I think the Flyers are going to want too much for him, and I don't think the Leafs can afford to pay Philly's price for what Scott Laughton is right now. And he's not really putting up the offensive production for me. Like, they need a guy who's more of a middle six that can step up if someone gets hurt and can play that offensive role, but is also still capable of being, a third line center, at worst second ryne center. And two names that Darren Dreger brought up were Ryan Strome and Ryan O'Reilly, the two Ryans.
Yeah.
Both those names very much intrigue me. I know that Mike has been very much on the bring back Ryan O'Reilly. He's been on that bandwagon, and it makes sense for a couple of reasons, but there's also reasons where it doesn't make sense. One is, does the player want to play here?
He already told the Leafs that answer's been given.
Now, does that change with Craig Berube here versus Sheldon Keefe? Potentially. I don't know.
Well, his problem was he didn't like the atmosphere outside the rink. He didn't like the focus that everybody had on the team. He liked the obscurity of being in an organization where there isn't a lot of question about how a player is playing on a minute-by-minute basis.
And considering where Nashville is right now, I don't even know what they're going to want for Ryan O'Reilly, right?
Yeah.
They're not giving him away, right? He's their number one. He's their number one center right now. And this is why the Ryan Strome is an intriguing one for me, because now look, Ryan Strome has 2 more. So I was just looking at this. He has 2 more years left on his deal at $5 million a year, which it's a lot. Right now, Ryan Strome is Anaheim's number one center. But that's also because they're protecting their younger players, their prospects like Leo Carlson and Mason McTavish, who are going to eventually take on the mantle of being their top centers. He signed for 2 more years at $5 million a year. That's expensive if he is going to be a third line center. But we just saw that they just traded Cam Fowler to the Blues, and they retained money on his deal. They retained almost $2.5 million they took back on that deal to make that trade for Cam Fowler, which makes a lot of sense for Anaheim to do that, just because they knew they were going to have to find a way to get more out of a return potentially. And Cam Fowler is also 33. Paying what he was getting paid, this doesn't make sense. So if I'm the Leafs, I don't know if Anaheim will be willing to take back salary, but if they are, I would consider Strome in the $3.5 to maybe $4 million range, and you throw in a little bit in return to get it back. Now, I don't know what that's going to cost. Is it going to cost a couple of prospects? Is it going to? I don't know if I throw a first round pick at Strome, because again, the Leafs don't have a lot of first round picks.
I go with a prospect, and Anaheim's rebuilding, so a prospect looks good to them. A prospect's just as good as a draft pick for them.
And the Leafs can throw in a second round draft pick this year if they want to. They do have a second rounder to give up here. But yeah, like the Leafs are in a position where are there some players on the roster that Anaheim would potentially consider? I don't know, but I would see what it would take for Anaheim to look at a moving off of Ryan Strome, because I think eventually they're going to want to move away from those older players and get some of the younger players more play time. And if you want to make the salaries work, and if the Leafs, maybe if the Leafs are looking to shed a little bit of cap space, throw in Cal Yarncroke. See if you convince Cal Yarncroke, if you're ready to play, you can go play in Anaheim.
He's young enough to be tempting.
Right? He'd be a good veteran player. He has one more year left on his deal after this year. So that would save the Leafs also $2.1 million, right? So I think there's ways to make that trade potentially work if Anaheim is reasonable with their return. Like Ryan Strome isn't having an elite season. But I like that route a little more than Ryan O'Reilly, just because I think that O'Reilly has to be wanting to come to Toronto to make that deal work. I would like to have Ryan O'Reilly back, only if he wants to play here.
Yeah. Well, my bingo card has Jonathan Toews on it, and the reason it has Jonathan Toews on it, you can take a flyer on him. Here's the question that he has to answer: do I want to go to a team where there's a chance to win a Stanley Cup, a realistic chance to win a Stanley Cup? Is what I have to offer something the team that I'm going to really needs? And you answered the question in what you were saying, and that is, if they can get a third line center that can play second line as well, and even go down to fourth line, I don't think there's a better player out there that could fit that role. And also his experience in Stanley Cup play would be would be awesome. And I also think financially they could get him for a song, because this season, if he's healthy enough to play, this is the season he's going to determine whether he wants to continue his career. And what would help continue his career and raise his value than be on a Stanley Cup run and prove that he still has that level of compete in him. And that's why I go with him, because the cost would be minimum. They wouldn't have to give away any draft choices, any assets. What the biggest problem they have is they'd have to put somebody on waivers to fit into the contract situation. So yeah, he would be the perfect pick for me if the Leafs determine that he's actually looking healthy enough to be, 80-90% of the guy he was in his prime. To expect him to be as good as he was in his prime, that would be a little too much. But I think what's between the ears is important too, that the Leafs can use.
Oh, I mean, Jonathan Toews would be a dream player to add if you're getting anywhere close to what he was in Chicago. Like, even when he wasn't at his best in Chicago, 31 points in 53 games in his last year. Still one of the better face-off players in the league defensively. Now, this is also when Chicago was on the nosedive down when his production went down. He was also hurt, right? He's not healthy. My concern is how healthy is he really? I know that he had that interview in GQ magazine that says that he's back to his playing weight and things like that, and he went through all those treatments in India. I would need to be very certain that he can be a contributor this year.
Absolutely.
I just don't know if he wants to do it this year. That's a lot to ask for him to come back this year, potentially. But for next year, I would consider it.
Well, David, he doesn't have to be an or. He could be an and. Yep. Like, you can get him with it not costing anything in assets, which I think is always important, especially for the Leafs. You could bring him in on a flyer and still go out and get the kind of guy like Strome that you're talking about. And that would be, that would be interesting. And, or if you think that he can really take it, in the playoffs and play the kind of way that he can, that would mean that would put less pressure on that hole to fill. And then all of a sudden the defense and the assets they have to offer could get them a better defender, that, a number 2 or 3 guy. It would be really nice to have a guy that has a shot from the point, because that's one thing the Leafs haven't had, and Riley just doesn't have. He's expected. What we saw him do there isn't an overpowering shot, a smart shot, because he's a smart player, but a guy that can shoot from the point and score goals. If the Leafs had that would solve a lot of problems they have, mainly the power play.
Yeah. So that's a good point to bring up too. So put it down in the comment section below. Would you rather trade for a player like Ryan O'Reilly, Ryan Strome, even put Mikael Granlund in there, or Brock Nelson? Those are players being thrown in there. Or take a chance on a Jonathan Toews where it only costs you money to bring
And it
him
won't
in.
be, and I think they could talk him into taking,
Oh,
you know,
he won't need a too much. He's made his money.
he
Right?
wants to prove he's an NHLer. If he
Yeah.
comes with his pride and with his work ethic, he's going to try to prove that he belongs.
Yes.
And what more do you want on a team than that?
Exactly. So those are all good reasons to consider that. So let us know what you think in the comment section below. On the next episode, we will preview the Leafs game against the Carolina Hurricanes. We'll also give our thoughts on how the Leafs have been doing at the midseason, what they need to improve on, and other storylines around the NHL. We'll discuss that next on the Locked On Leafs podcast. Thank you all for listening and for supporting the show. Make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. And again, thank you, Frank, for joining me. And we'll just see you next time here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.